Wes Anderson has a problem. After 25 years of making some of cinema's most distinctive films, critics are saying he's become trapped by his own success. The Phoenician Scheme, his newest film with Benicio del Toro and Cera, is being called his most Andersonian film ever. But instead of praise, that's become an insult. Some critics are calling it his best movie in over a decade and a return to form. Others, well, they're slamming it as a sleepy, droopy affair with no emotional center. Evidence that Anderson is wrestling with his own legacy, instead of creating something new. So what happens when a legendary filmmaker's greatest strength becomes his biggest weakness? Has Anderson rediscovered his magic, or is he trapped in an aesthetic prison of his own making? Let's break down why the Phoenician Scheme reveals the curse of being too distinctive.
Eager to escape into the French dispatch.
My father, where are you?
Asteroid City, Farm Route 6, mile 75.
Cera's from out of town. Help yourself to a hand grenade.
You're very kind.
Let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. The Phoenician Scheme is unmistakably a Wes Anderson film. Every shot is perfectly symmetrical, every line is delivered in that distinctive deadpan style. The color palettes are immaculate pastels. It's got that whimsical yet melancholy tone that made Anderson famous. The plot follows Zaza Cora, played by Benicio del Toro, one of Europe's richest men and a possible war criminal who keeps surviving assassination attempts. He reconnects with his estranged daughter, a nun played by Mia Therapleton, while Cera plays her inexplicably Norwegian tutor. It's classic Anderson, a father-daughter story wrapped in elaborate visual storytelling, featuring an ensemble cast of perfectly dressed characters speaking in clipped, profound sentences. The kind of film where even dust motes seem choreographed. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite hitting all the Anderson trademarks that fans expect, critics are split right down the middle about whether this actually works. 78% on Rotten Tomatoes suggest general approval, but the individual reviews tell a much more complicated story.
Fields of armaments and aviation.
Sole heir to my estate. Call it. Heads. Heads.
The positive reviews are genuinely enthusiastic. Den of Geek called it Anderson's best film in over a decade and praised his fresh spring in his step. Critics noted that Anderson seemed to have rediscovered the mirth and playfulness that made his early films so beloved. Benicio del Toro is getting universal praise for his performance as Zaza Cora. Critics describe him as terrific and perfectly suited to Anderson's anti-hero archetype. Roger Ebert noted that del Toro brings both menace and vulnerability to what could have been a one-note villain. Cera is also getting significant attention. Reviewers noted the satisfaction of seeing him in a Wes Anderson film, with many saying the collaboration exceeded expectations. His bewildered Norwegian tutor captures that perfect Anderson blend of deadpan confusion and unexpected heart. Critics who loved it praised Anderson for avoiding the trap of becoming too enamored with his own aesthetics. They noted that while the film is still gorgeously designed with his signature style, it doesn't sacrifice story for visual spectacle. One review noted Anderson manages to do what he does best without succumbing to self-parody. The comedy is getting particular praise. Multiple reviews described it as Anderson's most comedic recent work, with physical humor and sight gags that actually land. Empire's 4-star review said it proves the director is at his most fun when he bends his rules.
It's another Wes Anderson movie. This one is called The Phoenician Scheme.
Yeah, this falls in the category of people who make fun of Wes Anderson movies think they're all exactly like this one.
But the negative reviews are equally passionate. Their criticism cuts deep. Several critics accused Anderson of creative stagnation, suggesting he's become trapped in his own aesthetic formula. The harshest review called it a sleepy, drippy affair with no emotional center at its core. Critics noted that while the film looks beautiful, it lacks the heart that made Anderson's best work so compelling. One reviewer specifically mentioned that it feels like a misstep from a director who's still wrestling with his own legacy. The plot is getting absolutely savaged. Multiple critics described the business machinations as boring and obtuse. The Guardian noted that while it rattles amiably along, the elaborate negotiations feel arbitrary and confusing. Roger Ebert's review admitted they couldn't explain what the main character actually needs from various meetings. The plot structure feels like a skeleton to hang Anderson's visual interests on. IndieWire delivered perhaps the most damning critique, calling it the busiest of Anderson films and also the least rewarding. They argued that somehow both more linear than his recent work and significantly harder to follow. Several critics noted that Anderson seems to be backing away from deeper themes. While the film touches on corruption, capitalism, and redemption, reviewers feel he'd rather make silly comedy than engage seriously with these weighty subjects. The comparison trap is real too. Critics keep measuring it against the Grand Budapest Hotel and finding it lacking. Metacritic noted that it has none of the lavish, kooky excess of Anderson's best work, suggesting the formula feels tired rather than refined.
When you're putting together a work of journalism, you're gathering all your facts and information and impressions and observations and ordering them into something that's a story.
This divide reveals something deeper about Wes Anderson's current position in cinema. He's reached that dangerous point where his distinctive style has become so recognizable that every new film gets judged against the formula rather than its own merits. Anderson has spent over 20 years developing this aesthetic language. The symmetrical compositions, deadpan delivery, pastel palettes, and the whimsical melancholy. It's made him one of cinema's most distinctive auteurs, but it's also created what critics call an aesthetic prison. The positive reviews come largely from Anderson's devotees who appreciate seeing the master craftsman refine his approach. They view each film as a variation on a theme, like a jazz musician improvising with familiar structure. For them, the Phoenician Scheme represents Anderson finding fresh energy with his established parameters. The negative reviews reflect a different kind of fatigue. These critics want to see Anderson evolve, take risks, challenge himself beyond visual perfectionism. They argue that without emotional stakes or narrative innovation, even perfect cinematography becomes repetitive. There's also a broader question of whether Anderson's highly stylized approach can still surprise audiences. His early films felt revolutionary because nothing looked or sounded like them. Now, after a dozen features, even his most devoted fans can predict the visual language before seeing a single frame. The Cannes reception was telling. Festival critics who see hundreds of films annually seemed more likely to find the formula tiresome. Meanwhile, Anderson's dedicated fan base continues to celebrate each new variation of his themes.
We meet this man who's a big tycoon businessman who, right off the bat, he's got enemies.
He has survived all of them. I think 6 plane crashes at this point.
So he's brought Bjorn in as the on-hand tutor, and as the situation escalates, Bjorn's duties start to grow, and he takes on a more important role in the administration.
This split reveals a fundamental question about what we expect from distinctive filmmakers in 2025. Do we want auteurs to keep perfecting their signature style, or do we need them to constantly reinvent themselves? The critics who love the Phoenician Scheme appreciate consistency. They argue that Anderson has spent decades developing a unique cinematic language, and that each film represents a new story told in that language. Why should he abandon what makes him special just to prove he can do something different? Critics who find it stagnant represent a different philosophy. They believe that great artists should challenge themselves and their audiences. They point to directors like Scorsese or even Christopher Nolan, who maintain distinctive voices while exploring different genres and themes. You need to remember that there's also a generational divide here. Younger critics and audiences raised on rapid content cycles and constant novelty might have less patience for subtle variation on established themes. Older critics who've watched Anderson's career from the beginning might be more attuned to his nuances within his consistency. The streaming age complicates this further. With endless content competing for attention, does distinctive style matter more or less than it used to? Perhaps the real question is not whether the Phoenician Scheme succeeds or fails, but whether there's still space in modern cinema for directors who commit fully to a singular vision. Anderson represents something increasingly rare, a filmmaker with complete creative control who refuses to compromise his aesthetic for broader appeal.
The oldest one, and we quickly find out that he's been neglected.
He brings so much charm and sweetness to this character who's on the page is sort of very sort of a scoundrel.
So has Wes Anderson become trapped in his own style? The Phoenician Scheme makes a strong case for it. It's not a bad film, but it is exactly what you'd expect. Every frame polished, every beat familiar. Anderson has done something almost no one else in modern cinema has. Built a visual language so distinctive that you can spot it in a single shot. but that's also where the trap lies. The critics who love the film aren't celebrating bold new choices, they're praising how finely tuned the formula has become. The ones who don't, they're not pointing to failure, but to fatigue. That's what happens when you become too good at being yourself. Even brilliance can start to feel predictable. So maybe the real question isn't whether Anderson should evolve, maybe it's whether we still value directors who choose depth over breadth, who perfect their voice instead of chasing novelty. Anderson didn't misfire here, he delivered exactly the film he was meant to make, and maybe that's the problem. I want to say thank you for watching, and if you did like it, hit subscribe, and maybe give us a like, so that we can make more videos like this. Thank you so much.